Picture this: you're carefully turning the brittle pages of a medieval manuscript, its parchment yellowed with age, when suddenly your fingers freeze. There, scrawled in the margins beside a beautifully illuminated text, are words that send a shiver down your spine. May whoever steals this book be struck with fever. May their hands wither. May their eyes fail. This wasn't just a scribble, it was a curse, a desperate plea etched into history by the very people who dedicated their lives to preserving knowledge. These weren't idle threats. In the Middle Ages, books were more than just objects. They were treasures, painstakingly crafted by hand, often taking years to complete. And the monks and scribes who made them, they were willing to invoke divine wrath to keep them safe. But why go to such extremes? Imagine a world without printing presses, where every book was a rare, irreplaceable masterpiece. Losing a single volume could mean the disappearance of centuries of wisdom, science, or sacred texts. So scribes didn't just rely on locks or guards. They turned to something far more powerful: fear. These curses weren't just warnings, they were psychological weapons designed to terrify thieves into leaving precious knowledge untouched. Some promised eternal damnation, others gruesome physical suffering, all to protect the words on those pages. And the strangest part, many of these curses were personal, as if the scribe was speaking directly to the thief across the centuries, their anger and desperation still palpable today. Now, we're about to unravel the secrets of 21 of these haunting curses, each one a window into the minds of medieval scribes and the world they fought to protect. From chilling threats of blindness to eerie prophecies of misfortune, these inscriptions reveal how far people would go to safeguard their most prized possessions. But this isn't just a journey into the past, it's a reminder of how fiercely humans have always valued knowledge and the lengths we'll go to defend it. So turn the page with us and step into the shadowy margins of history, where every curse tells a story and every warning still echoes today. To understand why these curses held such power, we have to step back into the world of medieval scribes, a world where ink-stained fingers and candlelit nights were the price of preserving knowledge. In an age before mass production, every book was a monumental achievement. A single Bible could take a scribe over a year to copy by hand, each letter carefully shaped, each page painstakingly prepared. These weren't just books, they were acts of devotion, often created in the quiet solitude of monastic scriptoria, where silence was broken only by the scratch of quills on parchment. The monasteries of early medieval Europe, particularly in Ireland and Anglo-Saxon England, became fortresses of learning in a world where literacy was rare and precious. Scribes weren't just copying texts, they were guardians of knowledge, preserving everything from religious scriptures to ancient medical treatises. And because these books were so valuable, they attracted thieves. Imagine the terror of a monk returning to his scriptorium only to find a priceless manuscript gone. Centuries of wisdom vanished in an instant. No wonder they turned to curses. These weren't casual threats scribbled in frustration. They were calculated, often poetic, invoking the wrath of heaven itself. Some curses called down plagues or blindness, while others promised eternal torment in the afterlife. One famous example from an Irish manuscript warns, "May whoever takes this book without permission be damned forever. May his name be erased from the book of life." Another from an Anglo-Saxon psalter threatens, "Let the thief's hands rot, let his eyes be darkened, let him wander lost until he returns what he has stolen." These curses weren't just about punishment, they were about justice, a desperate plea to the divine to protect what human hands could not. What's fascinating is how personal many of these curses feel, as if the scribe is speaking directly to the thief across time. Some even include the scribe's name as if to say, "I made this and I will not let it be taken without consequence." This wasn't just superstition, it was a psychological weapon crafted to prey on the deepest fears of a deeply religious society. In a world where people believed wholeheartedly in divine judgment, these words carried real weight. But the curses also reveal something profound about how medieval scribes viewed their work. To them, books weren't just property, they were sacred objects, vessels of truth that connected the human and the divine. Damaging or stealing a book wasn't just a crime, it was a sin against God. And so the curses weren't merely threats, they were prayers, appeals to a higher power to defend what mere mortals could not. As we uncover these curses one by one, we're not just reading words on a page, we're hearing the voices of the past, desperate to be remembered, desperate to protect what they held dear. And in that desperation, we find a mirror to our own fears, of losing knowledge, of being forgotten, of seeing the work of a lifetime vanish into the shadows of history. In the medieval mind, words weren't just symbols on parchment, they were living forces, crackling with divine energy. Picture a world where every whispered prayer, every sacred text, every solemn oath was believed to shape reality itself. For scribes penning curses into their manuscripts, this wasn't mere poetry, it was cosmic law. The moment ink touched parchment, their words became binding contracts with heaven, unbreakable vows that even kings feared to challenge. This profound belief grew from ancient traditions where spoken words created worlds. Think of Genesis, "Let there be light," or the Norse sagas where skalds' verses could alter fates. By the Middle Ages, Christian Europe had absorbed this idea into its very bones. The Bible itself warned that not a jot or tittle of God's word would pass unfulfilled. And if Scripture held such power, why wouldn't a scribe's curse? Monasteries amplified this through ritual, blessing inks with prayer, handling parchments like holy relics. When a monk wrote, "May thieves be struck with leprosy," it wasn't metaphor, it was a sacred verdict awaiting execution. The psychological effect was staggering. Consider the case of a nobleman in 12th century France who stole a psalter from Cluny Abbey. The book's curse promised paralysis, and when the man later suffered a stroke, his family rushed the manuscript back, convinced divine punishment had struck. Even literate elites shared this terror. King Alfonso the Wise of Castile, no stranger to books, wrote laws punishing manuscript theft with excommunication, earthly justice, reinforcing celestial threats. What made these curses uniquely potent was their precision. Unlike vague threats, they often named specific punishments: blindness, famine, damnation. One Breton curse detailed exactly how the thief's body would fail, first his hands, then his bowels, finally his soul. This wasn't random cruelty. It mirrored medieval medicine's belief that illness spread through humors just as sin spread through actions. The curse became a spiritual disease, its symptoms foretold in awful detail. Yet the most fascinating aspect was how these curses weaponized guilt. Many invoked saints as witnesses before God, and Saint Bridget, "I condemn the thief." In an era where saints were seen as active protectors, this turned theft into sacrilege. A stolen book didn't just anger monks, it insulted celestial patrons who might retaliate against entire communities. Records show villages returning stolen manuscripts after crop failures or plagues, interpreting disasters as collective punishment. The scribe's genius lay in layered defenses. Alongside curses, they'd sometimes add book blessings, promising prosperity to donors who returned lost volumes. This carrot-and-stick approach played on medieval mindsets where every action had spiritual consequences. Whether motivated by fear or hope, the result was the same. books remained where they belonged, in the hands of those who cherished them as bridges between earth and heaven. Today, we might smile at these beliefs, but their legacy endures. Modern libraries still use bookplates warning, "Stealing books is a crime," echoing those ancient margins where curses once stood guard. The instinct remains identical: to protect knowledge by making its violation unthinkable. Only the tools have changed. Where medieval scribes invoked divine justice, we now call upon secular laws. Yet somewhere in the silence of rare book rooms, you can almost hear the whisper of parchment, the ghost of a monk's pen scratching out one final warning across the centuries. Among all the curses scratched into medieval manuscripts, none struck deeper terror than the promise of eternal damnation. Picture a thief under cover of darkness, fingers closing around a stolen manuscript only to freeze as candlelight reveals the words, "May your name be blotted from the book of life," glaring up at him. This wasn't just a threat of earthly consequences, it was a sentence passed in the celestial courts, condemning the thief's very soul. What made these curses so chilling was their precision. They didn't just vaguely threaten hell, they painted it in excruciating detail. One 9th century Irish scribe warned that thieves would burn in the unquenchable fires of Gehenna, where the worm never dies and the flame is never quenched. Another described demons tearing the thief's soul limb from limb for all eternity. These weren't idle metaphors, they drew directly from Scripture, invoking imagery that medieval Christians knew from sermons and stained glass windows. The message was clear: stealing this book wasn't just a crime against the monastery, it was rebellion against God himself. The psychological power of these curses can't be overstated. In an era where salvation was life's ultimate goal, the idea of eternal separation from God was paralyzing. Even kings hesitated. Records show nobles returning stolen manuscripts after nightmares or illnesses, fearing they'd triggered divine wrath. One famous case involves a German knight who took a psalter from a convent, only to abandon it at a crossroads days later when his child fell gravely ill. The curse had promised no peace in this life or the next, and medieval minds took such words literally. But these curses also reveal a fascinating duality in medieval spirituality. While they threatened hellfire, they often included loopholes for repentance. Some manuscripts added phrases like, "unless he returns it with due penance," offering thieves a way out. This mirrored the Church's teaching on mercy. Justice was certain, but redemption was always possible. The scribes weren't just terrifying potential thieves, they were guiding them toward moral choices, using fear as a tool for righteousness. What's remarkable is how these curses persisted across centuries. From the scriptoria of early medieval Ireland to the universities of 15th century Paris, the same threats reappear, proof of their enduring power. Even as society changed, the fear of damnation remained a constant. When printing presses eventually made books more common, the curses faded. But for nearly 1,000 years, they stood as the ultimate deterrent, written not in ink alone, but in the unshakable beliefs of an age where heaven and hell were as real as parchment and quills. If the threat of eternal damnation sent chills down a thief's spine, the promise of plague and pestilence struck directly at their mortal fears. In an age where the Black Death had wiped out entire villages, where lepers were cast out beyond city walls, and where a single fever could mean death by week's end, these curses weaponized the most visceral terror of medieval life: disease. One scribe's warning cut straight to the bone: "May the pestilence of God consume him who steals this book, limb by limb, breath by breath." The genius of these curses lay in their horrifying specificity. They didn't just invoke sickness, they named the very afflictions that haunted medieval nightmares. Some promised leprosy, ensuring the thief would watch their own flesh decay while being shunned by society. Others swore the culprit would go blind, a fate worse than death for scribes who lived by their eyesight. Most chilling were the wasting curses, condemning thieves to slowly wither away, their bodies mirroring the stolen book's eventual rotting, as if the parchment itself took revenge. What made these threats so potent was their social dimension. Illness wasn't just physical, it was a mark of divine disfavor. When a scribe wrote, "May he be cursed with boils like Job," they weren't just predicting pain, they were guaranteeing the thief would become an outcast. Records from 14th century France tell of a noblewoman who returned a stolen manuscript after her household fell ill. Terrified neighbors were whispering God had cursed her lineage. The book's margin bore a single line, "Let his children's children know the rot of his sin." Yet there's a fascinating paradox here. While these curses exploited fear of disease, they also revealed how medieval people understood contagion. Some scribes wrote curses that unfolded in stages, first a fever, then sores, then isolation, mirroring the progression of actual plagues. One particularly elaborate curse from a Spanish monastery even specified, "May his breath grow foul as his deed," eerily anticipating how bad air was blamed for spreading illness. The scribes weren't just invoking divine punishment, they were crafting biological narratives, using the era's medical understanding to make their threats feel inevitable. The psychological impact was brutal. Unlike damnation, a distant threat, disease curses promised suffering here and now. A thief might brave hellfire in the afterlife, but could they endure watching their skin blacken with sores? Would they risk their children coughing blood like the plague victims they'd seen tossed into mass graves? This was terror made flesh, and it worked. Library records from Canterbury show stolen books reappearing at monastery gates, wrapped in plague-tainted cloth thieves, hoping to break the curse by returning the sickness with it. But perhaps the most revealing aspect is how these curses evolved with each new outbreak. After the Black Death, scribes began adding rats and fleas to their maledictions. "May vermin feast upon his living flesh." During leprosy scares, curses specifically mentioned fingers falling like rotten twigs. These weren't static threats, they were living texts, updated to weaponize the newest horrors. In that way, the margins of medieval books became dark mirrors, reflecting society's deepest fears back at anyone who dared violate their sanctity. And so these curses endured, not just as warnings, but as time capsules of human vulnerability. When we read, "May his lungs fill with the breath of the damned," we're not just seeing a scribe's anger, we're hearing the gasp of an entire civilization that knew how fragile life could be, and how desperately they clung to the fragile pages that made sense of it all. While threats of disease and damnation preyed on spiritual fears, medieval scribes knew another terror cut even deeper, the specter of poverty. In an era where a single bad harvest could doom a family to starvation, where wealth hung by the thread of a lord's favor, curses targeting a thief's livelihood struck with brutal precision. One Anglo-Saxon monk penned a warning that would make any hand hesitate. "May his fields grow barren as stone, his cattle drop dead in their tracks, and the very beams of his house rot beneath him." This wasn't just vengeance, it was economic warfare, crafted to unravel a thief's life thread by thread. The power of these curses lay in their intimate understanding of medieval survival. Agriculture was the heartbeat of society. Crops meant food, livestock meant wealth, and a sturdy home meant protection from the elements. To threaten these was to condemn someone to social death. A French manuscript from the 12th century went further, cursing thieves with emptied coffers and creditors at the door, exploiting the dread of debt in an age when unpaid loans could land families in dungeons. Even nobility wasn't immune. One illuminated charter warned that any lord stealing it would see his lands divided, his titles stripped, and his children begging at crossroads. But the true psychological masterstroke was extending these curses to future generations. In a world obsessed with lineage and legacy, scribes promised thieves their descendants would inherit their ruin. A chilling example from a Scottish monastery reads, "Let his sons till salted earth, his daughters weave with broken looms, and may his family name fade from memory as his crimes have stained it." This wasn't just about punishing the thief, it was about erasing their entire bloodline from history's ledger. What's revealing is how these curses mirrored actual medieval disasters. When scribes invoked failed crops, they echoed the Great Famine of 1315. When they mentioned crumbling homes, they recalled earthquakes that flattened villages. By tying theft to real catastrophes, the curses felt less like superstition and more like inevitable prophecy. Records from Burgundy tell of a merchant who returned a stolen missal after his vineyard inexplicably withered, convinced the book's curse, which mentioned vines bleeding sour wine, had summoned his misfortune. Yet within this ruthlessness lay a strange mercy. Unlike eternal damnation, poverty curses often included escape clauses, unless he restores what was taken with interest. Some manuscripts even specified exact fines, turning divine punishment into a calculable risk. This reflected medieval economics where reparations could cleanse guilt. A thief might gamble on hellfire, but the certainty of financial ruin, that was a risk few dared take. These curses endure as dark reflections of an unequal world, where wealth was both fragile and sacred. When we read, "May his gold turn to dust in his hands," we're not just seeing a scribe's anger, we're hearing the collective fear of a society one bad winter away from ruin, where protecting knowledge meant threatening the very foundations of survival. Among all the curses inscribed in medieval manuscripts, none carried the institutional might of the anathema, the formal curse of excommunication. Imagine a thief breaking into a monastery library, only to find his own name glaring back at him from the margins. "Let John, son of William, be severed from the body of Christ, denied the sacraments, and cast out from the company of the faithful." This wasn't just a scribe's wrath, it was the full weight of the church descending upon a single soul. The power of these curses lay in their terrifying specificity. Unlike general threats of damnation, anathemas often named individuals, transforming theft into a public spectacle of shame. One 9th century manuscript from Tours lists 17 names: nobles, merchants, even fellow clerics, each condemned to eternal separation from God's grace. But the truly cunning scribes left curses open-ended, like a noose waiting for any neck. "Whoever steals this book shall be anathema maranatha," an Aramaic phrase meaning cursed until the Lord comes, sealing the verdict with Christ's own return. To understand why these words struck such fear, we must step into the medieval mindset. Excommunication wasn't just exclusion from church services, it was social obliteration. The anathematized couldn't receive last rites, ensuring their souls would languish in purgatory. Their bodies were denied burial in consecrated ground, leaving them to rot like common criminals. Even more devastating was the earthly impact. No Christian could eat, trade, or speak with the excommunicated without risking their own salvation. A single curse could turn a thief into a leper of the soul, wandering through a world that literally crossed the street to avoid him. Some of the most chilling examples come from political conflicts where books became weapons. When King Philip Augustus of France seized manuscripts from Fleury Abbey, the monks retaliated with an anathema so potent it pressured his eventual return of the loot. But the true masterpiece of psychological warfare comes from a Spanish monastery's ledger. After listing stolen books, the scribe added, "We withhold these names now, but on Judgment Day they shall be read aloud before the throne of God." The message was clear: escape earthly consequences and face celestial humiliation before all creation. Yet within this severity lay a fascinating loophole. Many anathemas included conditions for absolution, typically returning the book with public penance. This mirrored the Church's sacrament of reconciliation, offering thieves a path to redemption. One Irish psalter even specifies the exact penance: 40 days fasting and 12 pounds of silver to the poor. The scribes understood human nature. Fear might deter, but hope of mercy could reclaim. What makes these curses resonate across centuries is their brutal efficiency. While other threats relied on imagination, the anathema delivered immediate, tangible consequences. No need to wait for hellfire when your neighbors suddenly refuse to sell you grain or your newborn goes unbaptized. In an age where identity was rooted in faith, these curses didn't just punish, they unmade a person entirely. And so the books remained safe, guarded not by locks or blades, but by the most terrifying weapon of the Middle Ages: the power to erase a soul from the community of the living and the dead. In the clash of steel and the chaos of battle, a warrior's greatest fear wasn't just death, it was failure. The moment his sword snapped or his shield splintered, leaving him defenseless before his enemies. This was the nightmare medieval scribes weaponized in their curses, crafting threats that struck at the heart of a knight's identity. One 11th century manuscript from Normandy delivers a blow as precise as a dagger thrust. May his blade shatter like glass when he needs it most, may his armor betray him like Judas, and may his name be sung in taverns as the coward who fled. These curses didn't just exploit physical vulnerability, they targeted something far more fragile: reputation. In a world where honor was worth more than gold, the threat of disgrace could paralyze even the boldest warrior. Some scribes drew chilling parallels to infamous defeats, like the scribe who warned thieves they'd fall like Hector beneath the walls, their bodies dragged through the mud of their own shame. Others invoked biblical calamities, promising thieves would perish like the Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, drowning not in water but in ignominy. The psychological precision was brutal. Medieval warfare relied on trust. Knights needed to believe their weapons wouldn't fail, their comrades wouldn't falter. A curse that eroded that confidence was deadlier than any arrow. Records from the 100 Years' War tell of a mercenary who returned a stolen breviary after his sword inexplicably broke mid-duel, a weapon that had survived a dozen battles. The manuscript's margin bore a single line: "Iron obeys God before man." But these curses also reveal a deeper truth about medieval society. Battle wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Many warriors prayed before combat, blessing their arms with relics. A cursed weapon wasn't just unreliable, it was unholy. One 14th century English curse drives this home. May his sword thirst for his own blood, may his shield welcome his enemy's strike as a lover's embrace. This twisted imagery flipped the sacred bond between warrior and weapon into something monstrous, making every swing of the blade a potential act of self-destruction. What's most striking is how these curses adapted to different eras. Early monastic curses focused on divine punishment, but as chivalry rose, scribes began invoking feudal disgrace. A 13th century French example threatens thieves with the shame of a knight who loses his spurs, referencing the ritual where disgraced warriors had their golden spurs hacked off. By the late Middle Ages, some even mimicked legal decrees. One German manuscript curses thieves as outlaws beyond the king's peace, denying them the protections any soldier expected. Yet within this ruthlessness lay a grim pragmatism. Unlike damnation curses aimed at the soul, battle curses offered thieves a way out, often demanding only the book's return. After all, a dead thief couldn't restore stolen knowledge. This calculated mercy shows how scribes balanced terror with practicality, using fear not just for punishment but for restoration. Today, we might scoff at the idea of cursed swords, but the instinct remains. Modern soldiers still carry lucky charms. Athletes cling to rituals, proof that the fear of fate turning against us is timeless. Those medieval scribes understood something fundamental. Threaten a person's life, and they might risk it. Threaten their honor, their very identity. That's a risk few will ever take. Imagine reaching for a stolen manuscript in the dim candlelight, only to feel your vision blur as the very words you sought to steal swim and vanish before you. A cruel fulfillment of the curse inscribed on that same page. May his eyes be darkened so he cannot read nor see the light of day. This wasn't just poetic vengeance, it was a surgical strike against the thief's very ability to profit from his crime. In a world where literacy was power, blindness wasn't just a physical ailment, it was a symbolic erasure, stripping away access to knowledge as punishment for trying to steal it. The terror of these curses stemmed from medieval Europe's stark reality. Without modern medicine, an eye infection could lead to permanent darkness. Cataracts meant a life of shadows. And for scribes whose identities were bound to their ability to shape letters, losing their sight was tantamount to losing their souls. One 11th century monk put it bluntly, "Let the thief's eyes become as useless as his conscience, so he may grope in eternal night as he has made others grope for truth." The threat wasn't just blindness, it was the agony of knowing exactly what had been taken from you. What made these curses especially chilling was their ironic precision. Some specified that the thief would lose their sight while reading the stolen book, a moment of triumph transformed into irreversible loss. A 12th century Psalter from Canterbury warns, "As his fingers trace these holy words, so shall God trace darkness upon his eyes." Others played on deeper fears, like a French curse condemning thieves to see only nightmares when awake, blending physical and psychological torment. But the true cruelty lay in how these curses mirrored actual medieval punishments. In some regions, blasphemers or repeat thieves had their eyes gouged out, justice made visible. A stolen book's curse didn't just threaten divine retribution. It promised the same brutal symmetry as earthly law. Records from a Bavarian monastery tell of a nobleman who returned a manuscript after developing sudden cataracts, begging the monks to lift the curse that had left him blind as the justice he mocked. Yet within this ruthlessness there was haunting beauty. Scribes often framed blindness curses in lyrical language, comparing stolen knowledge to extinguished candles or eclipsed suns. One Irish manuscript laments, "May his world shrink to the size of a closed book, its wisdom forever locked away." This wasn't just anger, it was grief, a mournful recognition that stealing a book didn't just take parchment and ink, but the very light that made sense of the world. And so these curses endure as dark poetry, where physical and spiritual sight intertwine. When we read, "May his eyes fail as his morals failed," we're witnessing more than a threat. We're seeing the medieval mind's deepest conviction, that to steal knowledge wasn't just a crime against property, but against the divine light that made humanity human. Of all the bodily suffering scribes could invoke, none struck as primal a fear as thirst, the slow, maddening agony of a throat clenched tight as desert sand. Hidden in the margins of a 9th century Psalter lies one of the most visceral curses ever penned. "May his tongue swell like a rotting fruit, may his lips crack like drought-struck earth, and may clear water shimmer before him always, a cruel mirage forever beyond his grasp." This wasn't just punishment, it was psychological torture, weaponizing one of humanity's most fundamental needs. The brilliance of these curses lay in their universal resonance. In an era where polluted wells could doom villages and travelers perished from dehydration, everyone knew thirst's intimate terror. A scribe didn't need to describe hellfire, just the memory of a childhood drought when elders rationed sips of brackish water was enough to make a thief's hands tremble. Some curses compounded this by invoking hunger, may his belly shrivel as his soul has shriveled, or exposure to the elements, like a Bavarian manuscript warning thieves they'd wander frostbitten through eternal winter. These were sufferings no wealth or status could mitigate, leveling nobles and peasants alike, but the most chilling versions drew from ancient myths, grafting Christian dread onto older archetypes. One Anglo-Saxon curse explicitly references Tantalus, the Greek king, condemned to stand in a pool that receded whenever he bent to drink. By weaving pagan imagery into Christian texts, scribes created a hybrid horror that resonated across cultures. A 13th-century French example twists Psalm 69 into a curse. As vinegar was given to Christ, so may this thief drink only brine until his guts rebel. Here, the punishment mirrored the crime, stealing sacred words meant choking on their holiness. The psychological precision was devastating. Unlike Damnation's abstract threat, thirst curses exploited immediate bodily awareness. A thief might shrug off hellfire, but could he ignore the phantom burn of thirst while reading the curse? Some manuscripts heightened this by describing water's sensory details, the chill of a mountain spring, the glint of dew at dawn, only to snatch it away. This wasn't just cruelty, it was neurolinguistic warfare, tricking the brain into feeling what the words described. Records from medieval libraries confirm these curses' potency. A Venetian merchant's diary recounts returning a stolen book after dreaming of drowning in a sea of salt, waves lapping at my lips yet leaving me drier than before. The manuscript's curse had promised exactly that fate. Even more telling are marginal notes where later readers, perhaps guilt-stricken thieves, scrawled, "God forgive me," beside thirst curses, as if the words alone had parched their souls. Yet within this brutality lay a dark poetry. Thirst curses often likened stolen knowledge to undrinkable water. May wisdom tease his mind as streams tease the desert fox. This mirrored medieval theology where truth was living water for the soul. By denying thieves literal water, scribes symbolized their spiritual barrenness. The message was clear: stealing books didn't just parch the body, it withered the very soul's capacity to receive grace. Today, these curses linger as reminders of how elemental fear can be. In a world of bottled water and faucets, we've forgotten thirst's primal power. But open a medieval manuscript and suddenly the words, "May he thirst forever," don't sound like hyperbole, they sound like a sentence worse than death. In the flickering candlelight of a medieval scriptorium, a monk's quill scratches out a threat more chilling than hellfire. May his corpse rot beneath the open sky, denied even the kindness of worms, till crows pluck out his eyes as he plucked this book from God's house. This wasn't mere cruelty, it was psychological warfare targeting one of humanity's oldest fears, the terror of lying unburied, forgotten by both the living and the dead. For medieval Christians, proper burial wasn't just ritual, it was the first step on the soul's journey to salvation. Church doctrine taught that without consecrated ground, a soul might wander in torment until Judgment Day. Scribes weaponized this belief with ruthless precision. One 11th-century English curse condemns thieves to lie as the heathens lie, their bones scattered where no priest will ever sing. Another from a Breton monastery promises his name will fade from memory as his flesh fades from his bones. These weren't abstract threats, they were sentences of social and spiritual annihilation. The genius of these curses lay in their layered horrors. Physical decay was just the beginning. By denying thieves Christian burial, scribes severed their connection to the community of the faithful, both living and dead. A 14th century Italian manuscript puts it starkly: "No candle will burn for him, no bell will toll, no son will whisper his name in prayer." In an era where legacy meant everything, this was the ultimate erasure. Even kings trembled at such fates. Chronicles tell of nobles returning stolen relics after nightmares of wandering as headless shades. Some curses took the terror further, binding the thief's ghost to the stolen book itself. A chilling example from a German psalter warns, "His spirit will haunt these pages, whispering apologies no living ear will hear." This twisted the knife. Not only would the thief die unmourned, but his soul would remain trapped, forever circling the object of his crime. The message was clear: steal a book, and you don't just lose your place in heaven, you lose your place in history. Archaeology confirms how deeply these curses resonated. Excavations near medieval libraries often reveal apotropaic burials, corpses interred with stakes through their hearts or millstones on their chests. Scholars now believe these might be thieves who died under scribal curses, buried hastily with precautions against their vengeful spirits. A grisly discovery in Burgundy supports this: a skeleton found clutching a stolen manuscript, its margin bearing the words, "Let his hand never loosen its grip, even in death." Yet within this darkness glimmers a poignant truth. These curses reveal how fiercely medieval people clung to memory. When a scribe wrote, "May his grave go untended as his soul goes unloved," he wasn't just threatening punishment. He was affirming that every life, no matter how flawed, deserved remembrance. The very cruelty of the curse honored what it sought to destroy: the unshakable human need to matter, even beyond death's veil. So the next time you see an old manuscript, remember, its margins might hold more than words. They could cradle the echoes of 1,000 whispered fears, a chorus of voices pleading across the centuries, "Do not let me be forgotten." And in that plea, we hear not just a scribe's anger, but the universal tremor of mortal hearts beating against the dark. Few punishments cut deeper than the curse of isolation, the slow unraveling of every bond that tethered a person to the world. Imagine a thief clutching his stolen manuscript, only to read these words glaring back at him: "May his wife spit upon his shadow, may his children curse the day he was born, and may his own mother turn her face to the wall when he begs for bread." This wasn't just a threat of loneliness, it was the systematic destruction of a person's place in the tapestry of medieval life, thread by thread. In an era where identity was woven from kinship and community, exile was a living death. A 12th century curse from a French monastery spells it out with chilling clarity. Let him wander roadless lands where no voice answers his cries, where no fire welcomes him at dusk, where even stray dogs flee his approach. The brilliance of these curses lay in their pacing. They didn't just announce abandonment, they orchestrated it. First friends would grow distant, then family would deny kinship. Finally, even strangers would recoil as if the thief carried the plague. One Anglo-Saxon scribe crafted a curse that mirrored the stages of grief in reverse. May laughter die when he enters the room, may ale turn to ash in his mouth, may his footsteps echo as if he walks alone in an empty world. The psychological cruelty was exquisite. Medieval society had no safety nets, no homeless shelters, no soup kitchens. To be cast out was to starve, freeze, or descend into madness. A haunting example from an Irish psalter doesn't just curse the thief, it curses anyone who might show mercy. May those who give him shelter find their roofs collapsed, their wells poisoned, their livestock stillborn. This transformed the thief into a social pariah, a walking blight that villagers would drive away with pitchforks. Yet the most devastating curses targeted memory itself. A 13th century German manuscript threatens, "May his name rot on the lips of those who once spoke it fondly, till even the wind forgets to whisper it." In an age when legacy was immortality, this was soul murder. Records from Burgundy tell of a knight who returned a stolen charter after his own brother refused to recognize him. The document's curse had vowed to sever the cords of blood. What makes these curses so unsettling is their timeless resonance. Strip away the medieval trappings, and they speak to a fear we all share, the terror of becoming a ghost among the living. When a scribe wrote, "May his voice fade as his honor has faded," he wasn't just protecting parchment, he was weaponizing the most fundamental human need, to matter, to belong, to leave some echo of ourselves in the hearts of others. And in that, these centuries-old words still hold up a dark mirror reflecting what we all fear to lose. Of all the curses scribes devised to protect their precious manuscripts, none were quite as deviously ironic as those targeting the stolen book itself. Picture a thief triumphantly unrolling his prize under candlelight, only to watch in horror as the ink begins to blur and shift, letters twisting like snakes, words melting into nonsense, the very knowledge he sought to steal dissolving before his eyes. One 9th century Irish curse delivers this threat with poetic cruelty. May these holy words flee like startled birds from the page, leaving behind only the ghost of their meaning. The brilliance of these curses lay in their psychological precision. They didn't just punish the thief, they hollowed out the reward. Why risk damnation or disease for a book that would become useless? Some scribes took this further, promising the text would transform into something actively hostile. A 12th century German example warns, "The letters shall rear up like serpents, hissing lies into the thief's mind." Others swore the words would appear upside down or in a phantom language, like the Byzantine scribe who cursed his work to speak only in the tongue of Babel when touched by unclean hands. What makes these curses so fascinating is how they reflect medieval beliefs about the nature of writing itself. In an age where words were seen as vessels of divine truth, a corrupted text wasn't just inconvenient, it was spiritually dangerous. One chilling account from a French monastery tells of a nobleman who stole a gospel only to find the letters rearranging themselves into blasphemous phrases. He returned it in terror, convinced the book was possessed by the demon of confusion. The manuscript's curse had promised exactly that. May truth become lies in the hands of the wicked. But the most devastating versions targeted the thief's very literacy. Imagine the horror of a scholar watching his hard-won skill vanish, a fear scribes exploited ruthlessly. A 10th century English curse condemns thieves to forget the shape of letters as they forgot the shape of their souls. Another, from a Spanish medical text, threatens, "The more he strains to read, the more his mind will unravel, till even his own name stares back at him as strange sigils." These curses struck at the heart of medieval identity, where literacy was a sacred bridge between the earthly and the divine. Yet within this cruelty lay a profound commentary on the value of knowledge. By cursing books to become unreadable, scribes were making a bold statement. Stolen wisdom isn't wisdom at all. A manuscript in the wrong hands wasn't just property displaced, it was truth defiled. When we read, "May the words flee like deer before the hunter," we're witnessing more than a clever deterrent. We're seeing the medieval mind's deepest conviction, that knowledge, like virtue, cannot truly belong to those who take it by force. And so these curses endure as eerie testaments to an age where words were alive with power capable of revealing truth or unraveling minds, depending on the hands that held them. They whisper a warning that still resonates today. Some treasures lose their luster when stolen, not because they're diminished, but because the act of taking them changes everything about how they're seen. Some curses didn't just threaten divine punishment, they transformed the stolen book itself into a vengeful entity, a silent companion that would torment the thief day and night. Picture this: you've smuggled a manuscript out of a monastery, hidden it in your chambers, and as midnight stillness settles, the pages begin to rustle without any wind. Then come the whispers, not from outside your window, but from the book itself, murmuring your darkest secrets back to you in a voice like dry leaves scraping against stone. One particularly chilling curse from a 15th century German grimoire promises just that. May these pages breathe his crimes into the dark when he lies defenseless in sleep, till his own voice joins the chorus of the damned. What made these haunted manuscript curses so effective was their blend of folklore and psychological terror. Medieval people already believed objects could carry spiritual residue, holy relics healed, cursed amulets brought misfortune. By suggesting a book might become aware of its theft, scribes tapped into deep-seated fears about inanimate objects gaining sentience. Some curses claimed the manuscript would emit a rotting stench. Like the Breton curse warning thieves the pages would smell of opened graves, while others promised phantom sounds. A 13th century English psalter swore the book would sing the dies irae when touched by unclean hands, invoking the haunting Gregorian chant about Judgment Day. The line between superstition and strategy blurred beautifully here. These curses didn't just describe supernatural events, they planted suggestions so vivid they could manifest as psychological phenomena. Imagine a thief already racked with guilt jumping at shadows. Then he hears faint chanting from his satchel. Was it the book or his own conscience given form by the curse's words? Records from a Spanish Inquisition trial reveal one burgher who returned a stolen manuscript, convinced it had been, weeping wax tears on his desk. The curse had mentioned the tears of the martyrs staining the thief's wealth. Some scribes took this further, claiming the physical book would rebel against its captor. A notorious example from Prague threatens that the letters shall crawl like ants beneath the thief's skin, a visceral image playing on medieval fears of magical infestation. Others promised the book would become impossibly heavy. May it weigh upon his chest like a tombstone, or unnaturally cold. These weren't just threats, they were scripts for psychosomatic torment, designed to make every interaction with the stolen object feed the thief's paranoia. Perhaps the most disturbing versions involved time distortion, a concept still unsettling today. Several curses suggest the thief would experience time differently while reading, like the Italian manuscript warning. An hour with this stolen text shall feel as a year in purgatory. Modern psychology confirms how expectation shapes perception. If you believe a book is cursed, time will drag as dread heightens your awareness. These haunted manuscript curses reveal scribes as early masters of psychological operations. They understood that the best way to protect knowledge wasn't just to threaten the body or soul, but to turn the very object of desire into an instrument of terror. In doing so, they created something far more potent than superstition, self-fulfilling prophecies of guilt, where the real haunting came not from the pages, but from the human mind's limitless capacity to punish itself. Among all the divine forces scribes could summon, none struck as personal a blow as invoking a saint's wrath. Picture a thief unfurling his stolen manuscript only to find not just a generic threat, but a list of celestial enforcers glaring back at him. May Saint Michael cast him into the abyss. May Saint Peter turn the heavenly key against him, and may Saint Bartholomew flay his soul as he flayed the heathens. This wasn't just divine anger, it was heavenly bureaucracy in action, with specific saints assigned precise roles in the thief's damnation. The power of these curses lay in their intimate familiarity. Medieval Christians knew saints as more than just figures in stained glass. They were patrons, protectors, and sometimes participants in daily life. A farmer might pray to Saint Anthony for lost livestock, a mother to Saint Margaret for safe childbirth. So when a scribe wrote, "May Saint Dunstan blind him with his own tongs," referencing the saint's legend as a blacksmith, the threat felt visceral. Saints weren't distant judges, they were craftsmen with tools, warriors with swords, and they'd been personally recruited to avenge this theft. Some curses assembled entire celestial task forces. A 13th century French missal lists 7 saints, each assigned a different torment. May Saint Lawrence grill his flesh as he was grilled. May Saint Sebastian pierce him with invisible arrows. May Saint Catherine break his mind upon her wheel. This wasn't random cruelty. It mirrored medieval judicial processes where different officials handled specific punishments. The message was clear. Stealing this book didn't just break monastic law, it triggered a full heavenly trial. The most chilling versions named saints associated with the manuscript itself. A gospel book might invoke the 4 evangelists, while a medical text would call upon Saints Cosmas and Damien, patron healers who could presumably inflict as well as cure. One Irish psalter even includes Saint Bridget not just as punisher but as witness. "Before Bridget's holy fire, I inscribe this curse, and she will see it fulfilled." Here, the saint became both jury and executioner, her presence as tangible as the parchment itself. What's revealing is how these curses evolved with popular devotion. When St. Thomas Aquinas was canonized in the 14th century, scribes began invoking him to confound the thief's mind as he confounded heretics. This wasn't static tradition, it was living theology, adapting to new saints and new fears. A Venetian merchant's diary recounts abandoning a stolen book after dreaming of St. Mark's lion gnawing his ribs. The curse had specifically named Venice's patron saint. Yet within this ruthlessness lay a strange comfort. By directing curses through saints, scribes acknowledged that even divine justice required intercession. It reflected the medieval worldview where heaven and earth were woven together, where a stolen book didn't just anger monks but disrupted the cosmic order saints maintained. When we read, "May St. Maurice spear his conscience as he speared the faithless," we're hearing more than a threat. We're witnessing a world where the sacred was never abstract, but as real and immediate as the quill that scratched those words into the margin. 13th century scribes had a particularly vicious sense of poetic justice when it came to punishing manuscript thieves. They turned the crime itself into the punishment. Hidden in the margins of a worn psalter from Canterbury lies one of history's most ironic curses. May his fingers ache with the labor he forced upon others. May his eyes dim copying these same words until the end of days. This wasn't just a threat, it was a dark parody of the scribe's own backbreaking work, weaponized against the very hands that dared steal it. The brilliance of these curses lay in their cruel familiarity. Anyone who'd ever copied a manuscript knew the agony, the hunched shoulders, the hand cramps that made quills tremble, the candlelit hours that blurred vision. By condemning thieves to this endless toil, scribes crafted a hell tailored to their victims' greed. One German monastic curse twists the knife further. May he find every word he writes vanish like morning mist, forcing him to begin anew forever. Imagine the horror, a thief trapped in a loop of futile labor, becoming the very scribe he sought to rob. Some versions took this irony to surreal heights. A French book of hours warns that the thief would seek a missing page through endless libraries, always one shelf away from finding it. This played on a scribe's nightmare, the incomplete text transforming it into an eternal chase. Even more inventive was a Venetian curse promising the thief would hear the scratching of 1,000 pens in his dreams, a sonic torture mimicking the omnipresent sound of monastic scriptoria. But beneath the dark humor lurked genuine insight into medieval work ethics. Scribes didn't just resent theft, they resented the disrespect for their vocation. One angry colophon spells it out. While you slept on goose-down pillows, we bent over parchment till our spines curved like these very letters. The unending task curses weren't just punishments, they were brutal lessons in empathy, forcing thieves to walk a mile in the scribe's worn shoes. Records suggest these curses sometimes backfired in unexpected ways. A marginal note in a Spanish manuscript tells of a thief who did become a scribe after stealing a psalter, not from fear, but because the curse's description of meticulous craftsmanship awakened his curiosity. By detailing their suffering so vividly, some scribes accidentally romanticized their art. Yet most thieves got the message. A recovered manuscript from Salzburg bears stains that might be sweat or tears beside a curse promising 10,000 copies, each more flawed than the last. What makes these curses endure is their timeless resonance. Today's equivalent might be condemning a hacker to debug code eternally, or a plagiarist to rewrite Wikipedia by hand. The medieval scribes understood something profound. The best punishment mirrors the crime, not just in severity but in symbolism. When they wrote, "May his theft become his life's work," they weren't just cursing thieves. They were defending the sacred irony that creation and punishment can sometimes share the same ink-stained hands. The cruelest trick of all wasn't threatening punishment, it was making the thief believe they'd won. Imagine clutching your stolen prize, only to watch as your family falls to bickering over its ownership. Your crops wither inexplicably, and every guest who admires it later meets with misfortune. This was the diabolical genius of the cursed gift, a manuscript that carried its own retribution woven into its very pages. A 15th century German curse spells it out with chilling simplicity. What he takes in greed, let him lose in grief, and may his heirs curse his name with every misfortune this book brings. These curses exploited a profound medieval belief that objects could carry moral weight. Just as relics radiated holiness, stolen books might emanate a kind of spiritual pollution. Some scribes promised the manuscript would become a lodestone for disaster. Let it draw lightning to his roof, wolves to his flock, and discord to his table. Others took a subtler approach, like the Italian scribe who vowed the book would whisper to his wife of secret infidelities, whether real or imagined. The goal wasn't just to punish, it was to transform the coveted object into a source of endless unease. Historical records reveal how potent this psychological warfare could be. A merchant's diary from Bruges recounts returning a stolen chronicle after his daughter's dowry negotiations mysteriously collapsed. The manuscript's curse had sworn it would sour all sweet things. Even more telling are the marginal notes found in some recovered books, where later owners wrote frantic pleas like, "God lift this burden," beside original curses, suggesting the dread lingered for generations. What makes these curses so fascinating is their inversion of value. In an age where books represented wealth, the cursed gift threatened something worse than poverty, the corruption of wealth itself. A French monastic curse puts it starkly: "May his gold turn to ashes in his chest, his wine to bile in his cup, and his joy to dread in his heart." This wasn't just about losing treasure, it was about treasure turning against its owner. The most devastating versions targeted legacy. A Welsh curse doesn't just threaten the thief, it condemns his descendants. May his sons blame him for every failed harvest, his daughters for every stillborn child, until his line ends in a house divided. In societies built on kinship, this struck deeper than any physical torment. Yet within this darkness lies a twisted mercy. Unlike damnation curses, the cursed gift often offered release. Return the book, and the hex would lift. Some even specified rituals for purification, like the Spanish manuscript requiring the thief to wash its pages with tears of true remorse. This wasn't just vengeance, it was rehabilitation, giving thieves a chance to undo their mistake before it consumed them. Today, we see echoes of this in modern legends of cursed artifacts or ill-gotten gains bringing bad luck. Those medieval scribes understood something timeless. The most effective punishment isn't taking what someone stole, it's letting them keep it and watching as their prize becomes their prison. Among the darkest strokes of a scribe's pen were curses that doubled as moral indictments, solemn declarations that the thief's fate was now entirely his own doing. Picture a margin note that doesn't just threaten but mourns. Woe to him who scorns these words, for his blood is on his own hands, and the angels themselves will turn away. This was more than a warning. It was a courtroom verdict inscribed in ink, framing the act of theft as a deliberate rejection of divine law. What set these curses apart was their eerie tone of resignation. Unlike fiery threats of damnation, they carried the weight of a disappointed parent or a judge passing sentence. A 13th century English psalter puts it bluntly, "Let no man plead ignorance, for the law is written here in letters brighter than the sun." The scribe wasn't just protecting a book, he was creating an airtight spiritual contract where the thief's defiance became proof of guilt. Historical records reveal how seriously medieval society took such warnings. A bishop's chronicle from Mainz recounts a nobleman struck by paralysis after ignoring a manuscript's curse, a case debated in church courts as evidence the man had willfully spurned heaven's caution. The curse's phrasing mattered. By emphasizing the thief's agency, scribes turned misfortune into apparent confirmation of divine justice. Even the language mirrored legal formulas, with phrases like, "as testified by these witnesses," listing saints and evangelists as cosmic notaries. The psychological brilliance lay in how these curses exploited hindsight. A thief might brave immediate threats, but how would he feel when illness struck later? The curse had already scripted his regret. On his deathbed, let him remember this page and know his suffering was chosen, not ordained. Some scribes took this further, weaving in biblical parallels, like comparing thieves to Pharaoh hardening his heart against Moses' warnings. One French example twists the parable of the rich fool. Like the man who built bigger barns, he shall face judgment with empty hands. Yet these curses also reveal scribes grappling with morality themselves. A poignant Bavarian example breaks mid-curse to lament. "Why must I write these words? Why does man force his brother to such bitterness?" Here, the curse becomes a mirror, not just for the thief's soul, but for the scribe's weariness at having to wield such threats at all. Modern law still echoes this principle with posted notice. Statutes the idea that visible warnings negate claims of ignorance. Those medieval scribes understood something timeless. The most devastating punishment isn't just suffering consequences, but knowing you walked into them eyes wide open every step of the way. In the Middle Ages, a name wasn't just a word, it was the fragile thread that stitched a person into the tapestry of history. To have that thread snipped was to vanish from the world twice over, first in body, then in memory. That's why one of the most devastating curses a scribe could pen wasn't a threat of pain or damnation, but something far colder. May his name wither like a fallen leaf, and may no tongue shape its syllables again. This was annihilation in its purest form, a sentence that erased the thief not just from the present, but from all futures yet to come. The terror of these curses lay in their precision. They didn't just condemn the thief, they dismantled their legacy brick by brick. A 10th century Irish curse goes further, vowing that no bard will sing of him, no chronicle will mark his deeds, and the very stones he walks upon will forget his shadow. In societies where lineage was everything, where kings traced their right to rule back through generations, this was a fate worse than execution. Imagine working your whole life to build a reputation, only to have every trace of you dissolve like ink in rain. What made these curses so psychologically brutal was their grounding in medieval reality. Without tombstones, portraits, or written records, most people did vanish from memory within a few generations. The scribes were weaponizing a fear everyone already carried. A chilling example from a Burgundian manuscript spells it out. As the peasant's name fades from the fields he tilled, so shall the thief's fade from the book he stole. This wasn't just metaphor, it was observation. Peasant graves went unmarked, their lives unrecorded. The curse promised thieves they'd share that oblivion, no matter how high their station. Some scribes took this further, tying the curse to the stolen book itself. One Anglo-Saxon psalter threatens that the thief's name would live only here in this margin as a warning to others. Think of the horror. Your sole memorial wouldn't be a laudatory epitaph, but a cautionary tale scribbled in a book you'd failed to steal. It inverted the medieval obsession with memoria, the practice of praying for the dead to keep their souls present in the community. Instead of prayers, the thief would get silence. Instead of remembrance, a void. But the true cruelty lay in the curse's ripple effects. A name forgotten meant ancestors uncounted, descendants unclaimed. A 14th century Italian example curses not just the thief, but his lineage. May his children bear no patronymic, and may their children ask in vain whose blood runs in their veins. In an era where identity was collective, where you were John, son of William of the House of York, this was social disintegration. Records from Normandy tell of a knight who returned a stolen charter after his own grandsons couldn't recite their family history. The curse had promised 3 generations to oblivion. What's haunting is how these curses echo our own deepest fears today. In an age of digital footprints and eternal archives, we've never been more obsessed with being remembered or more terrified of being erased. Those medieval scribes understood something primal, that to steal a book wasn't just to take parchment and ink, but to mock the very impulse that drives us to write our names in the first place. The unspoken plea beneath every curse wasn't just "don't steal," it was "remember me." And in that, they left behind a paradox. The more fiercely they tried to erase thieves from history, the more indelibly they preserved their own voices, whispering across the centuries. In the medieval world, an oath wasn't just a promise, it was a sacred bond, a pact sealed not just between men, but before God himself. To break one was to risk more than reputation. It was to invite cosmic retribution. That's why scribes didn't just call thieves dishonest, they branded them as oath-breakers, traitors to the very fabric of society. One chilling example from a 12th century charter cut straight to the heart of this fear. May he be judged as Judas was judged, his silver returned as blood money, his name spat upon by the angels. This wasn't just a curse, it was a moral indictment, framing theft as an act of betrayal echoing through eternity. The power of these curses lay in their cultural resonance. Medieval life revolved around oaths. Vassals swore fealty to lords, knights pledged loyalty to causes, even merchants sealed deals with hand-on Bible vows. By equating theft with oath-breaking, scribes tapped into a universal dread. A particularly vicious Anglo-Saxon curse doesn't just condemn the thief, it mirrors the language of feudal disgraces. Let his lands be forfeit as his honor is forfeit, his shield splintered as his word was splintered. The message was clear. Stealing a book wasn't just a crime against property, but against the sacred order holding society together. Some scribes took this further, weaving in biblical parallels that would have chilled any Christian thief. A French psalter curses book thieves by comparing them to Gehazi, struck with leprosy for his greed, and to Ananias, who fell dead for lying to the Holy Spirit. These weren't random references, they were carefully chosen cautionary tales, warning that divine punishment for broken trust was both swift and severe. Even more cunning were curses that invoked secular betrayals, like the Breton manuscript threatening thieves would wander like Gainlan, referencing the traitor from the Song of Roland, whose name became shorthand for dishonor. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating versions framed the curse as the thief's own broken promise. A German monastic curse reads, "By taking this book, he has sworn falsely to God, and so his tongue shall cleave to his mouth when he next tries to swear an oath." This turned the act of theft into a kind of involuntary perjury, ensuring the thief's future words would betray him just as he'd betrayed the manuscript's sanctity. Records from Canterbury tell of a knight who returned a stolen missal after failing to take communion. The priest claimed his lips would not form the words of the creed, as if the curse had literally glued his tongue. What makes these curses so enduring is their twisted brilliance. They didn't just punish, they reframed the crime, transforming petty theft into grand treason. In a society built on trust, where a man's word was his bond, few fates were more terrifying than being cast out as an oath-breaker. When we read, "May he be shunned as the faithless are shunned," we're not just seeing a scribe's anger, we're witnessing the medieval mind's deepest terror, that a single act of greed could unravel the very ties that made you human. For a medieval scribe, there was no crueler fate than leaving a masterpiece unfinished, a lifetime of labor vanishing into the void with no legacy to show. That's why some of the most psychologically devastating curses didn't just threaten the thief's body or soul, they sabotaged his future. Picture a nobleman stealing a beautifully illuminated manuscript, only to read these words smoldering in the margin. May his quill snap at the zenith of his craft, may his ink dry when his genius flows brightest, and may his name be remembered only for what he failed to achieve. This wasn't just punishment, it was the theft of potential itself, a sentence condemning the thief to watch his own ambitions wither like untended vines. The terror of these curses lay in their intimate understanding of creative agony. Medieval scribes knew better than anyone the pain of a work interrupted. The half-finished psalter abandoned when winter cramped fingers, the chronicle left incomplete when plague emptied the scriptorium. By weaponizing this fear, they crafted threats that resonated with scholars and artisans alike. A 13th century German curse doesn't just promise physical harm, it vows the thief will see his magnum opus crumble like sand between his fingers, each page blank when he reaches for it in his final hour. The imagery is brutal in its specificity, targeting the dread every creator carries, that their life's work might amount to nothing. Some scribes took this further, inflicting poetic symmetry on thieves who stole books. A Venetian curse from 1452 warns that for every manuscript taken, 2 of the thief's own volumes shall perish, one by fire, one by flood. This wasn't random destruction. It mirrored the medieval belief in proportional justice, where crimes mirrored their punishments. Records from Florence tell of a humanist scholar who returned a stolen Aristotle text after his own treatise inexplicably vanished. The manuscript's curse had promised, "Knowledge taken shall be knowledge lost." What makes these curses so chilling is how they exploit the universal fear of irrelevance. In an age before digital backups, a single disaster could erase generations of work. A particularly cruel example from an English monastic ledger curses thieves with hands that write only trivialities, ensuring they'd live to see their talent reduced to parody. Others targeted not just the act of creation, but its reception. May his words fall on deaf ears, his paintings on blind eyes, his music on hearts of stone. This was social death by 1,000 cuts, where the thief's very voice would be stripped of meaning. Yet within this ruthlessness lay a profound commentary on the nature of legacy. These curses reveal how medieval people viewed creative work, not as property, but as fragments of the soul made tangible. When a scribe wrote, "May his life's work mold forgotten in some attic," he wasn't just threatening a thief. He was defending the idea that to steal a book wasn't just to take parchment, it was to kidnap a piece of someone's immortality. And in that defense, we hear an echo that still resonates today, the terrified whisper of every artist, scholar, and dreamer who ever prayed their work might outlive them. There's a particular kind of dread that comes not from immediate punishment, but from the certainty that it's coming slowly, inevitably, like the shadow of a hawk circling its prey. This was the terror behind the divine hunt curses, where scribes transformed God from a distant judge into an unrelenting tracker, and the stolen manuscript into a beacon drawing celestial vengeance. One 11th century Irish curse captures this perfectly. "May the breath of the Almighty stir the hairs on his neck in the dead of night. May archangels whisper his sins into the wind that guides the hounds, and may he know no rest until the book is returned to its sanctified home." The power of these curses lay in their inversion of a fundamental medieval comfort, the idea of God as protector. By recasting the divine as pursuer, scribes turned the natural world itself into an instrument of dread. Every rustle of leaves could be Gabriel's wings, every distant howl the baying of heaven's mastiffs. A chilling example from a Spanish monastic text doesn't just threaten pursuit, it maps the thief's inevitable collapse. First he will run, then he will hide, then he will beg for mountains to swallow him, but the eyes of the Lord pierce deeper than any grave. This wasn't just supernatural enforcement, it was psychological warfare, scripting the thief's descent into paranoia step by step. Some curses borrowed imagery from medieval hunting manuals, describing God as the perfect huntsman. A Frankish psalter warns that the thief would tire like a stag at midwinter, his strength failing as the righteous close in, mirroring aristocratic stag hunts where exhausted animals were ceremonially finished by nobility. The message was clear: the thief wasn't just a criminal, he was quarry, and his capture would be both spectacle and sacrament. The most unsettling versions involved saints as specialized trackers. A Burgundian manuscript recruits Saint Hubert, patron of hunters, to mark the thief with glowing scent like a fox in snow. Others invoked Saint Michael not as merciful weigher of souls, but as heaven's bounty hunter. The sword he raised against Lucifer now hangs above this thief's unguarded throat. These curses exploited the medieval belief that saints weren't just intercessors, they were active participants in earthly justice. Historical accounts suggest these curses sparked real terror. A knight's confession from Normandy describes abandoning a stolen charter in a churchyard after dreaming of hounds with eyes like burning stars sniffing at his trail. The manuscript's curse had promised no moat deep enough, no forest thick enough to hide from divine pursuit. Even more telling are marginal doodles in recovered books, crude sketches of fleeing figures with arrows or spears at their backs, as if readers were visualizing the curses unfolding. What makes these curses so enduring is their primal resonance. Long before medieval times, humans feared being hunted by beasts, by enemies, by forces beyond their control. By tapping into that ancient terror and sanctifying it, scribes created something far more potent than a threat. They made theft feel like rebellion against the cosmic order itself, where every moment of freedom wasn't escape, but the tightening of a divine snare. For scholars and teachers in the Middle Ages, the voice was more than just a tool. It was the vessel of their very identity, the instrument through which wisdom flowed from one generation to the next. Imagine then the horror of a professor stealing a prized manuscript, only to find this warning etched into its margins. May his tongue wither like a root in salted earth. May his lectures twist into nonsense, and may his students cover their ears at the sound of his corrupted speech. This wasn't just a threat, it was a surgical strike against the thief's most cherished possession, his intellect. The cruelty of these curses lay in their precision. They didn't just silence, they transformed. A 12th century curse from the University of Paris vows that the thief's words would turn to ash in his mouth, while another from Oxford promises his arguments will unravel like frayed rope the moment he speaks them. These weren't random afflictions, they were tailored nightmares for academics, ensuring the very act of teaching would become a public humiliation. For a scholar, losing the ability to articulate ideas wasn't just a professional setback, it was a kind of living death. Historical records reveal how deeply this fear ran. A marginal note in a recovered Boulogne law text tells of a jurist who returned a stolen volume after his students began mocking him for speaking in tongues like a possessed man. The curse had sworn to tangle his Latin into barbarous sounds. Even more chilling are accounts of preachers who, after ignoring such warnings, found their sermons met with inexplicable silence, congregations staring in bafflement as once eloquent words dissolved into incoherence. But the true genius of these curses was their psychological layering. They didn't just attack the voice, they weaponized the scholar's own pride. A particularly vicious example from a Cambridge manuscript doesn't just promise muteness, it guarantees the thief will hear his own voice as others hear it, dull, stumbling, bereft of all wit. This was torture for the intellectually vain, forcing them to confront their diminished brilliance every time they opened their mouths. What makes these curses resonate today is their uncomfortable truth. Knowledge stolen can never truly be owned. When a medieval scribe wrote, "May his tongue betray him," as he betrayed these words, he was defending something deeper than property. He was upholding the sacred bond between wisdom and its rightful keeper. The silent tongue curses remind us that some thefts don't just take, they hollow out the thief from within, leaving behind a husk of what they sought to steal. The most terrifying curses weren't those that promised immediate suffering, they were the ones that waited. Hidden in the margins of a crumbling 13th century apocalypse manuscript lies the ultimate threat, written in a hand trembling with conviction. When the heavens crack open and the dead rise from their slumber, may this book groan from the earth's depths to point its accusing finger at him. This wasn't just a curse, it was a delayed verdict, a sentence passed in the present but reserved for eternity. What made these final judgment curses so devastating was their inevitability. Medieval Christians didn't just believe in the end of days, they expected it, prepared for it, saw its signs in every eclipse and famine. A scribe's threat that a stolen book would testify against the thief when the stars fell wasn't metaphor, it was a chilling certainty. One Spanish monastic curse spells out the scene with gruesome clarity. As the angel rolls back the sky like a scroll, so shall this scroll unroll his crimes before the assembled host of heaven. The imagery was deliberate. Just as the book had been unfurled by human hands, so too would it unfurl divine justice. The psychological genius lay in how these curses weaponized time itself. Unlike threats of blindness or disease, which a thief might gamble would never come to pass, Judgment Day was an inescapable appointment. A German Psalter curse twists this knife further. Let him grow old in false security, counting his stolen treasures year upon year, until the trumpet blast freezes his rotting heart mid-beat. This was terror drawn out over decades, the slow dawning realization that every passing day brought the reckoning closer. Some scribes took this further, personalizing the apocalypse. A French Book of Hours doesn't just condemn the thief to judgment, it places him in the scene. Amidst the wailing of nations, may his voice rise alone to protest innocence, only for these very pages to fly open and silence him. The curse becomes a script the thief is forced to reenact, his damnation pre-written in the margins of the book he stole. Records from Canterbury tell of a nobleman who returned a manuscript after his priest described a vision of a ledger in Christ's hands, its margins glowing with stolen titles. The curse had promised exactly that eternal exposure in heaven's court, but the most haunting versions gave the book itself a voice. An Irish scribe warns that the manuscript will cry out like Abel's blood from the earth, while a Venetian curse swears the pages will rustle with the sound of 1,000 accusing tongues. This wasn't just personification, it reflected the medieval belief that sacred objects participated in divine will. Just as relics performed miracles, cursed books would awaken as witnesses at the end of time. What makes these curses endure is their terrifying elegance. They transformed theft from a momentary crime into an eternal liability, ensuring the punishment would outlast not just the thief's life, but the very world itself. When we read, "May this book condemn him when the seas give up their dead," we're not just seeing a scribe's anger, we're witnessing the ultimate act of preservation. These words were never meant to fade with the parchment. They were written for the day when time itself would run out, and every hidden deed would finally be brought to light. These 21 curses etched into medieval manuscripts weren't just the superstitions of a bygone era. They were masterclasses in psychological warfare, theological ingenuity, and even early legal innovation. Think about it, centuries before copyright lawsuits and digital piracy laws, scribes were crafting deterrents so potent, they bypassed courts entirely and went straight for the soul. Each curse was a meticulously designed trap, exploiting the deepest fears of its time: eternal damnation for the devout, social ruin for the status-conscious, creative impotence for scholars. But what's truly remarkable isn't just their brutality, it's their sophistication. Take the cursed gift, for example, the promise that a stolen book would bring relentless misfortune to its thief. This wasn't just a vague threat. It mirrored real medieval economic anxieties, where a single stroke of bad luck could unravel generations of wealth. Or consider the silent tongue curses that robbed scholars of their eloquence, a fate worse than death in universities where debate was currency. These weren't random acts of spite, they were surgical strikes tailored to the vulnerabilities of those most likely to steal. The scribes didn't just want to punish, they wanted to educate, to make the consequences of theft so viscerally clear that temptation withered before it could take root. What's equally fascinating is how these curses evolved alongside medieval society. Early monastic curses leaned heavily on hellfire, but as universities rose and literacy spread, the threats grew more nuanced, targeting reputation, legacy, even intellectual fulfillment. By the 15th century, you'll find curses that wouldn't feel out of place in a modern courtroom, like the one demanding thieves pay 12 pounds of silver to the poor as restitution. These scribes were pioneers, creating a shadow legal system where divine justice and earthly consequences intertwined. Yet for all their creativity, these curses reveal something profoundly human: the terror of being forgotten. When a scribe vowed a thief's name would fade like footsteps in the rain, he wasn't just protecting parchment, he was fighting for his own immortality. Every manuscript was a life's work, a fragile bridge across time. To steal it wasn't just theft, it was murder of memory. Today, our safeguards are digital watermarks and copyright strikes, but the fear remains unchanged. We still scramble to protect what we create, whether it's a YouTube video or a novel, because the stakes are eternal. Those medieval scribes understood a truth we've never escaped. Knowledge is the only treasure that grows when shared, but only when shared freely, not taken by force. So the next time you open an old book, run your fingers along its margins. You might not find curses penned in iron gall ink, but you'll sense their echo. the whisper of centuries of creators who, just like us, poured their souls into something meant to outlast them. And if you ever feel tempted to take what isn't yours, well, let's just say those scribes had 21 very persuasive reasons to reconsider.